It's July 26th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the IMF slashing South Korea's economic growth outlook for this year. According to the International Monetary Fund, the country's growth is projected to slow to 1.4% due to persistent challenges in the global economy. The 2024 outlook remains at 2.4%. China appoints a veteran diplomat Wang Yi as its new foreign minister and removes former nominee Qin Gang with his whereabouts unknown for a month now. South Korea's Constitutional Court unanimously rejected the National Assembly's vote to impeach Safety Minister Lee Sang-min, saying that he did not violate any laws when responding to the Halloween Itaewon crowd crush. He returned to work immediately on Tuesday. The IMF has lowered South Korea's 2023 economic growth outlook to 1.4%. Persistent challenges in the global economy, including weak exports, are behind the downward revision. Lee Seung-ja starts us off.
The International Monetary Fund cut its 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea on Tuesday to 1.4%, down 0.1% from its previous estimate of 1.5% in April. The Washington-based organization cited uncertainties facing South Korea from both home and abroad, including global monetary tightening measures and weak export figures. The latest forecast is on par with the South Korean government and the Bank of Korea's outlook of 1.4%. However, the Asian Development Bank last week lowered the country's growth outlook to 1.3%, down 0.2% from its previous estimates. Despite the downward revision of South Korea's economic growth forecast for this year, the IMF kept its estimates for 2024 at 2.4%. In the meantime, the IMF revised up its 2023 global economic growth outlook to 3%, up 0.2% from its previous estimate. The upward revision comes on the back of the recovery in the service sector, eased U.S. debt ceiling woes, and abated concerns over a crisis in the banking sector. However, the IMF warns that the global economy is facing lingering challenges despite near-term resilience, adding that countries around the world should maintain their monetary tightening policies. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, the Constitutional Court dismissed the National Assembly's call to impeach Safety Minister Lee Sang-min, saying the Halloween Itaewon crowd crush was not the result of a specific reason or individual. Our Lee Si-hoo reports.
South Korea's Constitutional Court on Tuesday unanimously rejected the opposition-controlled National Assembly's impeachment motion against Interior Minister Lee Sang-min, allowing him to return to duty 167 days after he was suspended. In its ruling, the nine-justice court headed by Justice Lee Jong-seok noted that, quote, although Lee did not make the best decisions in disaster response as the Interior Minister, it is difficult to say that he significantly breached his obligations as laid out by the Constitution, such as the Framework Act on the Management of Disasters and Safety and the State Public Officials Act. The court also said the tragedy in Itaewon was not down to one specific cause or person, but due to the lack of clear manuals on safety management of events without an organizer, and due to a lack of comprehensive response capabilities in dealing with large-scale disasters. This is the first impeachment ruling on a minister since the beginning of South Korea's constitutional government. It comes 269 days after the deadly crowd crush in Itaewon late last year, which killed 159 people, and nearly 6 months after the vote to impeach Lee.
Back in February, the opposition-controlled National Assembly voted to impeach Minister Lee, holding him responsible for government failures in planning and responses that likely contributed to the large number of casualties.
Prior to the ruling, the court held 4 public hearings participated in by Minister Lee, the Assembly, officials from the Interior Ministry, the National Police Agency, and the National Fire Agency, as well as bereaved family members of those killed in the tragedy. For an impeachment to be endorsed, at least 6 out of 9 justices have to vote in favor. A leading constitutional scholar explained that although there is no doubt that the unfortunate tragedy claimed many victims, that doesn't directly translate to legal responsibility.
Moral responsibility is not one of the criteria for impeachment judgments in South Korea. The Constitutional Court saw that in purely legal terms, the minister was not legally responsible.
Meanwhile, after the court's decision, an official from the presidential office said that the majority opposition in the assembly abused its impeachment right and will be judged by the public for such, quote, unconstitutional behavior. 이시후, Arirang News.
Over in China, China's top diplomat Qin Gang has been out of public eyes for a month now. The country has removed him from his post and replaced him with his predecessor Wang Yi. Our foreign affairs correspondent Eun-ji has more.
China has removed Qin Gang as foreign minister and replaced him with his predecessor Wang Yi. It's been less than 7 months since Qin was appointed to the post last December. China's state media reported that the country's top legislator voted to appoint Wang Yi as foreign minister during a session convened on Tuesday, with no reason for Qin's removal given. Qin had disappeared from public view almost a month ago, but the foreign ministry has provided no details about his status, raising speculation about his whereabouts. Earlier this month, the Chinese foreign ministry announced that Qin would not be attending the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting from July 11th to 12th in Jakarta because of health reasons. The ministry later declined to offer any further information about his absence and has since then refused to answer reporters' questions at daily briefings, while censoring details from official transcripts, including the initial comment about Qin's health.
What is the current situation with Foreign Minister Qin Gang, and when will he return to public duties?
I have no information to provide in regard to your question.
As the weeks passed with no explanation for his sudden disappearance, speculation turned to the possibility that he was being punished for stepping out of line politically. Then there were rumors of an affair with a female television presenter who was normally quite active on social media but had also suddenly disappeared. Qin, a 57-year-old diplomat and a trusted aide of Chinese leader Xi Jinping, had a quick rise to the position of foreign minister after serving as China's ambassador to Washington. He was last seen in public on June 25th during a meeting in Beijing with the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko. Qin's predecessor, Wang Yi, a veteran diplomat who was the foreign minister from 2013 to 2022, will step back into the role. Eun-ji, Arirang News.
The U.S. Secretary of Commerce reaffirmed Washington's China policy that aims to find a balance between promoting American business there and protecting national security. Speaking at an event at the Wilson Center on Tuesday, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said the U.S. needs to do business with China wherever it can, but we need to protect wherever we can. Citing Disneyland and Starbucks, she pointed to the food, entertainment, and health industries that could be promoted in China, while still working with the U.S. allies to restrict Beijing's military technology. Currently, the U.S. bans exports of advanced microchips to China for security purposes, saying China is using them for its military. President Yoon on Tuesday met the Prime Minister of Luxembourg and the Governor-General of New Zealand, who are here in the country to commemorate 70 years of the ceasefire between the two Koreas. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon expressed hope for stronger ties with Luxembourg on Tuesday as he met with the country's leader Xavier Bettel, accompanied by a 93-year-old veteran of the Korean War, Leong Moyang. Meeting with Moyang, who was wounded in 1951 but volunteered for a second tour, the president said the Korean people will never forget his courage and devotion to defending the freedom of a faraway country in the 1950-53 war.
처음에 총상을 입고 일본으로 후송이 돼서 치료를 받은 다음에 다시 또 참전하겠다고 해서 한국전에 부상 치료를 받고 또 참전을 하셨는데 어떻게 해서 그렇게 용기 있게 두 번이나 참전을 결심하게 되셨나요?
I was hospitalized for 4 months as I injured my left leg. There was a puncture in the bone. I couldn't use my legs.
The United Nations says Luxembourg sent 110 troops in total and lost 2 in action, with 17 wounded. In his talks with the Prime Minister, Yoon expressed his appreciation for Luxembourg's dispatch of its troops to defend the freedom and democracy of South Korea. To expand bilateral ties going forward, Yoon and Patel agreed to boost trade and investment and strengthen cooperation in space and quantum science. To facilitate greater communication, Patel noted that Luxembourg is preparing to establish an embassy in Seoul within the year. Touching on geopolitical issues, the two leaders agreed to work together to address North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threats. Patel added that Yoon's recent visit to Ukraine was highly significant and called for their continued solidarity and support for Kyiv. The South Korean president on Tuesday held another one-on-one meeting with New Zealand Governor-General Cindy Kiro, also thanking the country's veterans for their sacrifice and dedication.
The back-to-back meetings were held ahead of a ceremony this week marking the 70th anniversary of the Armistice Agreement that stopped active fighting between the two Koreas, which also coincides with UN Forces Participation Day on Thursday.
Officials from some 22 nations have been invited to Seoul this week, representing the countries that fought alongside the South as part of the UN forces. The Veterans Ministry says the country sent a total of 1.96 million troops and medical personnel to aid the South. Among them, nearly 38,000 were killed and over 103,000 were wounded. Oseong, Arirang News.
Marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean Armistice this year, we take a thorough look at trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, and how the three-way partnership works to manage the situation on the Korean Peninsula. With Stephen Herbert, President of Asia Dialogue this morning. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Seoul-Washington alliance has long been considered pivotal, right? Now, how is trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo so crucial?
Well, it's especially crucial at this time. We've just seen North Korea fire its intercontinental ballistic missile with marked improvements, the Hwasong-18. So certainly there will be talk among them about that and the response. And of course, there are broader geostrategic issues of concern for all three, to include China, the issues around the Taiwan Strait, as well as Russia in Ukraine. And so more and more, the three are finding themselves, by way of geopolitics and geosecurity, bound together to try to construct constructive responses. And of course, with the economies the way they are, all three really need one another for supply chain diversity and for boost, especially as growth has slowed.
That is right. So North Korea's military threats are not just provocations to the Korean Peninsula, but it's a threat to the whole geopolitical scene. And the three sides need each other at the moment to boost their economic competence in the world.
That's exactly right. And the nuclear threat is one that undermines not only regional security, but also the non-proliferation regime. And of course, the economic factors coming out of the pandemic are tremendous. And so trying to find ways to stimulate growth, to diversify supply chains, and to create jobs, especially for young Koreans, young Americans, and young Japanese, will be paramount on these national leaders' minds.
Right. And the three leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are set to meet again, this time at Camp David, reportedly on August 18th. Now, how is this upcoming meetup so meaningful in terms of deterring North Korean threats?
Well, it's significant because this last year there was a marked number, some 52 meetings, either digitally or in person among the leaders of Japan, the United States, and Korea. This is a very important sit-down relative to what we've just seen by way of the Hwasong-18 test, relative to concerns about China and Russia. And of course, there's symbolic importance with Camp David, and it's a place that is afforded a great diplomatic history and importance to see the United States president alongside of President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida together to talk about coordination and cooperation forward.
Right, we're speaking of these escalating military ambitions by the regime. Then The trilateral summit follows the official launch of the nuclear consultative group between South Korea and the U.S. that officially kicked off, right? Now, will there be any way for maybe Japan to get involved and participate in the group, in any chance?
Most likely. Certainly it's a process that was started, as we've seen, between the United States and South Korea. It is primarily aimed at sharing information on coordination, but bringing Japan in is important, especially given its intelligence and monitoring capabilities. And the real hope is that there'll be better real-time live tracking of DPRK missile tests among South Korea, Japan, and the United States. That's the type of operational capability much needed. I'd also urge them to consider issues like nuclear safety, meaning that with all these tests, with the increase, we have an increase of risk in the region. And so we should be looking at ways to find controls and find ways to lower the level of risk relative to these nuclear tests and relative to some sort of mishap or miscommunication, which could amplify the process in very dangerous ways.
Indeed. Now, in the meantime, there is also speculation that Japan could be separately reaching out to North Korea for talks, right? These are just speculations, but how likely is that scenario? I mean, what will happen if it is the case?
Well, it's unlikely that an actual meeting will take place. Prime Minister Kishida was foreign minister when there were some important meetings that took place and an agreement in 2014 that was essentially annulled in 2016. So it's been some years since the Japanese and the North Koreans have seen any progress, but it's an important domestic political issue for Japan because of the issue of abductees. And in 2002, 5 were returned, but Japan's concerned about 12 other individuals. And so for Kishida to do well, it helps in terms of how he shows in the lower parliament elections when those are called as head of the LDP after next September. So there's a domestic impetus to try to see some improvement and try to get some answers on the abductees. However, given the current state of hostilities, it's probably unlikely that he'll see much success in that regard, but an effort nonetheless.
All right, President Herbert, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Honolulu this morning.
Aloha, and thank you.
And also to mark the 7 decades of the Korean War Armistice Agreement, South Korea and France conducted their first ever air drills. Our defense correspondent Qin Gang was at the site.
South Korea and France held their first ever joint air exercises over the skies of Busan on Tuesday. The training comes as part of France's annual Pegasus 23 mission, which is aimed at increasing its military presence and influence in the Indo-Pacific region. The mission involves the deployment of tens of aircraft from France to the Indo-Pacific to promote cooperation with regional countries, especially with partners like South Korea.
Establishing a mutual understanding on issues in this region. It's a process of jointly preparing solutions in various fields, whether that be issues regarding security, the environment, or the pandemic.
The Korean Air Force participated with 3 F-15Ks and 2 F-16 fighters, while the French Air and Space Force fielded 2 Rafale fighters, the country's key fighter aircraft capable of performing various combat missions, including nuclear deterrence, as well as 1 A400M transport aircraft and an A330 multi-role tanker transport. These fighter jets from both countries also flew over the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement on Thursday. More than 40 French veterans who have dedicated their lives to the Korean War are buried in Busan's UN Memorial Cemetery.
We, the people of the Republic of Korea, have not forgotten the help provided by over 20 UN countries during the Korean War. I think it is very meaningful to have their descendants gather and train together.
The French Air and Space Force is on a 3-day stop in South Korea until Wednesday. Although it's a short period of time, both South Korea and France hope to further expand their military exchanges in the future by sharing each other's know-how and conducting joint exercises in various locations. Qin Gang, Arirang News, Busan.
North Korea's state-run media reported earlier this morning that leader Kim Jongun has paid his respects to fallen soldiers ahead of the 70th anniversary of Armistice Day. Kim reportedly also visited a cemetery dedicated to Chinese soldiers who died while fighting during the Korean War. A number of high-ranking officials accompanied him there, including his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong. Meanwhile, with Pyongyang inviting both Chinese and Russian delegations to celebrate what is known as Victory Day in the north, the U.S. State Department stressed that both Beijing and Moscow should help with relieving tension on the Korean peninsula.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Belgium, where 8 men on Tuesday were found guilty of organizing a series of deadly bombings in the capital, Brussels, that killed 35 people and injured hundreds. The bombings took place in March 2016, targeting Brussels airport and a train passing by a metro station near the European Commission headquarters. It remains the deadliest terrorist attack in Belgium's history. Responsibility for the attack was claimed by Islamic State extremists. After an 8-month-long trial, the jury found 6 men guilty of murder. Another 2 were found guilty of taking part in terrorist activities. Some of those on trial were previously convicted for their role in the November 2015 Paris terror attacks. Turning over to Greece now, where a 3-day period of mourning has been announced after 2 airborne firefighters died when their waterbombing aircraft crashed while tackling wildfires on the island of Evia. Footage of the crash on Tuesday shows the plane flying low and dropping water over a wildfire. The plane then appears to hit a tree before disappearing into a ravine and exploding. According to the Defense Ministry, the pilots belong to the Greek Air Force. They were battling the blaze alongside 3 other aircraft and roughly 100 ground-based firefighters. Now, the tragic event comes as Greece is battling a number of wildfires across the country, including on the islands of Rhodes and Corfu. Now, the torch design for the Paris 2024 Olympics and Paralympics was unveiled on Tuesday in the French capital. Its design imitates the reflection of the Eiffel Tower on the rippling water surface of the Seine River, and its round design is also meant to represent peace and equality between athletes. Now, made of recycled steel, the 1.5-kilogram torch stands 70 centimeters tall. Organizers say a limited number of these torches will be made to save resources. The torch will be lit in April at Olympia in Greece, the birthplace of the Games. It will then return to France for a torch relay starting on May 8th in Marseille, where 10,000 torchbearers will take turns carrying it before lighting the Olympic cauldron at the opening ceremony on July 26th.
Good morning. It's a rainy start to Wednesday in some parts. Heavy rain is soaking the north of Gyeonggi-do and west of Gangwon-do and east of Jeollanam-do provinces this morning. Heavy rain alerts have been issued in Paju and Yeoncheon in Gyeonggi-do, with rain falling at a rate of 30 millimeters an hour. And through this morning, there could be 60 millimeters of more showers. Meanwhile, expect to see heavy passing rain across Korea this afternoon, so please keep an umbrella handy. A heat wave advisory has been issued pretty much everywhere in Korea. Rain will only add moisture to the air, so drink plenty of water to stay hydrated today. Uncomfortable temperatures continued with a tropical night, and highs will be similar to yesterday afternoon. Then there will be a chance of sudden showers through Friday. Then central regions and Jeollabuk-do province will see more showers this Saturday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Korea time.